MFPers, guests, friends, family, anybody listening here to the Just Show Up podcast. Check it out. I got this fluffy little thing here on my shirt. This is a new microphone. Coach Joe has one.
New mics.
Funny story, it took Joe at least like 30 minutes to try to figure this thing out. And I go, Joe, I think you should maybe just plug this into there, try that out, bang. We're all good to go. Now we are official with new mics. No more of the screechiness. No more of the, clacking and clicking when we pass the microphones and all that good stuff. So we are set. We are excited. And we are pumped to talk about a very intriguing topic. This is Monday. This is November 4th. Tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, November 5th, which means it's election day, which means a lot of people going to be going all over the place, whether if you're on one side or the other side. And you get to listen from two individuals who are probably very more neutral, where we like to listen to both sides. So just for some clickbait for you now, because we're going to touch on the election. We're going to touch on politics today. What?
Crazy.
Fitness, politics, neutral guys talking about it.
Neutral guys.
Right? We're going to talk about politics, but you got to wait. You got to listen. So we're going to reel you in a little bit. We're going to get you in. We're going to talk about some serious things, though, about you actually being in control of your reality in your life, which we talked about a little bit in the past, but now kind of relating this more specifically to, what we're going to be expecting here with ourselves and our country. So let's get grounded. We're going to take our 3 breaths, and then we're going to start talking. Cool beans? Wherever you're at, just stop what you're doing. I get it. Maybe some of you can't. Maybe you have things you're doing. Maybe you're just somebody who likes to just fast forward through this part. But what we're going to do for today is really focus or maybe let go of this idea of who is talking. When you process a thought, when you hear a thought, you go through a thought, who is that? Just keep that question very general. Who is talking? What is processing? What is being put out into the world? And just ponder that. Let's take our 3 breaths. Take a deep inhale through your nose. Hold. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Let it out. Inhale. Hold. And exhale. Hopefully you got to hear those 3 breaths with a little bit more clarity here with the mics, all right? Joe, give us that quote.
All right, so I need a little bit of grounding after I fought with the mic for 30 minutes. So anyway, I have a quote from Dr. Casey Means. She wrote a book I'm currently reading called Good Energy, The Surprising Connection Between Metabolism and Limitless Health. It says, in the modern West, where unlike many indigenous and Eastern cultures, we tend to be culturally avoidant of talking about death or having curiosity about it, leading it to be an existential fear for many. So many of the texts that have stood the test of time, spanning Rumi, Khalil Gibran, Hafiz, Marcus Aurelius, Yoganananda, Seneca, Lao Tzu, Thich Nhat Hanh, Thich Nhat Hanh,
Yep.
All right, and more, implore us to examine death and trust that it is both natural and not to be feared. Well, first of all, I've been really enjoying this book, and I think that this is just such an interesting thing to think about. And I just in general have really not coming from Western culture, just over the last year, doing a lot of like inner work and like working with you has actually got me to understand more Eastern philosophies, and viewing death in a different perspective has been a very cathartic process for me. And I think just overall, it's not just the Western culture having an avoidance of something as like death, but also just an avoidance of fear. I think that, in relation to what we're talking about today is like learning about how to live with fears and anxieties, and, understanding and developing different relationships really towards them.
Dude, I love this quote. Just so you guys know, I don't even know what the quotes are going to be before Joe brings them up. He obviously sees my layout, but there's so many good things in this. One, when I did my mindfulness degree, I took an Eastern philosophy class, and I was just so fascinated by, from a general point of view, by the way life is looked at, and when we talk about concepts of death and fear as just part of this is like a very, very minimal part of our eternal experience. And they all knew, especially indigenous tribes, of, like this very, very small part of your actual eternal experience is all a part of a growing process. And I've learned a lot about indigenous cultures through doing plant medicine work myself, and actually experiencing many different forms of death and experiencing many different forms of fear. And when I tell you guys, actually I think this is going to be a great segue into this idea of like, what is control? I do a lot of work with, obviously substances that take you out of control, and they bring about a lot of fear. And you will, I've not saying you will, but I've experienced legitimate, like, I think I might have died in the most beautiful, spiritual, holistic, growth way possible. And I've also experienced a lot of fear of losing control in a lot of these circumstances. And it really came back to this question of, when I've gone through these experiences, I've had to battle with death and fear. Obviously, it's a little bit different than like when we experience death of someone that's close to us or someone that but it is truly the same thing from that Eastern philosophy and perspective of like why all of this is even happening to begin with, which could be in a whole nother conversation for another day. But it came back to me questioning about like, well, what is this whole concept of like, what am I trying to be in control of? What am I trying to hold on to? And what am I trying to really understand about myself that is so attached to these perspectives of what death and fear actually is?
Yeah, it's something that I don't think really a lot of people think about. And like when you do, it's like you just reframe the whole idea of death, like, because there's a Western way of looking at it, and then there's just a completely different and open way of looking at it. So I think that, I love this quote. I definitely recommend the book. Get it on your audiobook grind.
Yeah, I might have to dive into this.
Check it out, man.
I just love the name, Good Energy.
Good Energy.
Yeah, well, and death doesn't have to be actual, like a physical death.
Yes.
It could be metaphysical. It could be just a change in a perspective, right? And we've talked about death and rebirth here before, but let's talk about the idea of control. Let's talk about Control 101 and what does actually like being in control mean? And I think control, this idea is like it's like one of our most valuable things. But it's also one of our most detrimental assets to ourselves of like wanting to have control over everything and anything in our lives. Yeah. And so the basics of control is that it is what we call a primitive response. And so a primitive response would be looked at as something that is actually not conscious. Like you don't understand what that response actually is. So when it comes to, for example, like our senses, through survival, our ability to want to just feel good, like our nervous system and our brain, which I'll get into in a second of like what that actually has to do with control, but our ability to come back to balance, like our brain and our nervous system wanting to get to this state of homeostasis. And this primitive response, fear and survival, happens through, physical levels, happens through emotional levels, it happens through thought form, and obviously it happens through like life circumstances. Like I want to have the control of being able to, put the keys in my car and start my car and go take off to work, or, having my schedule and like being in control. People might look at it like that. Like I would control like everything that happens in my life from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed.
Yeah.
And we'll start to reframe this idea of like, is that actually serving me, or is it sometimes maybe holding me back?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, when it comes down to like going back to just primal ideas, right? Like a lot of our ideas of control and these responses of fear and survival really are primitive. Like when you think about, what human ancestors have had to face, like, millennia ago, right? Like there was legitimate physical danger all the time. And for most of us here, like thankfully we're not in immediate physical danger, but it's almost like our minds construct, those kind of circumstances. And even though we're, living in a world where it is very safe to live, like we still have that like fear trigger in our mind where we're trying to protect ourselves. And, now obviously we don't have to escape from, we're not going to get charged by woolly mammoths, right? But that can get manifested just in like your day-to-day office life and anxieties.
Well, that'd be millions of years ago. You don't want to get me on tangents about actual ancient civilizations, 500,000 to 12,000, even to BC, beforehand, in which they were actually thriving in a lot of ways. But yeah, these primitive responses really come down to, well, let's just talk about some of this, right? The physical experience, let's just say related to all of us, right? Our need, this primitive response for control is the ability to physically like get up and off the ground, to do what we say like in CrossFit, like these functional day-to-day things that give us physical, we'll use the term freedom, to be able to perform and complete physical tasks, right? That's the idea of like, I am in control, I have this freedom to actually physically perform something. Somebody who lacks control of the physical body is somebody that, has trouble like walking up a set of stairs and they're out of breath. Or we could talk about the primitive emotional responses, which typically are like hunger, desire, our general gender responses that are primitive, or just the feeling like emotional sensations of feeling secure and safe. Like those are all emotional responses to being in control, right? I want to provide for my family. I want to be able to have, fulfill my nervous system needs of like eating and being able to actually like sustain the live, or hydrating, right? Those are all responses. And then more importantly, what we'll get into is like the thought, because this is really where things start to shake up. And when we really get into the bigger parts of our topic today is the control of thought, which is where I would understand in Western society and philosophy is where we have a poor relationship with understanding the idea of a primitive thought and where does actually thought come from, and how thought is actually the complete opposite of what we're thinking. It's actually, the more I understand thought and where it actually comes from, the more control I actually am. And a lot of this has to come down to this topic of letting go, listening, observing, being less reactive to thought, to primitive responses, to then make a positive impact and then actually become more in control of how I start to move forward and how I start to evolve in life. Now that kind of in a nutshell, saying that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. You're like, all right, Coach Marco, like, where are you going with all this? But that's where we want to talk about, like, I think that's where we struggle the most with society, and that's obviously where, like, mental health comes into a thing with Western culture, where we see a lot of other philosophies in Eastern cultures where mental health maybe is not as much of an issue, or just other forms of health and control, right? It's just really coming back to now making this thought form distinction of, where do I start to let go of thought to actually understand thought of what it actually is.
Yeah, I found like an interesting relationship with thoughts, because like there is no way that you can control your thoughts, but thoughts can develop such power that they can really start controlling you. And I think that is where we kind of start to lose ourselves. And I think what's important to understand is, like, there's a lot of neuroscience that goes into this, just like how amazing our brains are. Our brains are always doing something. Like, even as you're just sitting here, whether you're just eating dinner, your brain is like, synapses are firing, connections are going, like, it's nonstop. And, sometimes, like, your brain comes up with amazing stuff, and sometimes it just comes up with stuff. And like, if you are constantly trying to control that flow, it's like trying to stop, like, it's trying to, like, drain an ocean. Like, it's impossible, and you have to develop a relationship. And it took me, like, it's something I actively work on. Like, it's like, you have to just start to become the observer of these thoughts.
So let's get into that then. So I have a question. My question for you is then, like, okay, I'll talk about what a thought is, but, like, for you, where is the thought coming from? You kind of answered it, but, like, where does it come from? And is that thought actually Joe? Is Joe creating that thought?
For me, no, I don't believe so. I think, like, I notice the thoughts, but I don't create the thoughts. Thoughts just come.
So where are they coming from? Where do you think?
A crazy brain.
Well, no, you kind of answered it, right? So, and I talked about this a few episodes ago. We talked about manifesting and all these things and creating a reality. So, law of the universe or existence it's called mentalism. These are called Hermetic principles, and these are much more ancient than the Bible. And mentalism is the idea that everything comes from thought form. All creation comes from thought form. And for the human experience, the thought form, we think, is developed from the brain. Which essentially, yes, it is, because like you're saying, it's always working. It's always got all these synapses firing. I want you to think about this as, the brain is just a magnet. It's electromagnetic component of us, but for the majority of us, it's a magnet. And we know that's happened because of all the electrical activity that's happening. So the moment we're conceived and the spirit enters the physical body and it's going through, the brain is developing and it's already absorbing every single bit of stimuli from then until who you are now. Every single little thing. And that's not just from, obviously, the visual sense, the tangible senses through feel, senses, listening, hearing, but everything plays a role into how the magnet is pulling in and how it's conditioned. And that's essentially how thoughts are being formed. Now, the bigger question is that actually who Joe is? Are the thoughts that are being conditioned from the minute you're conceived and you're born and you enter this world to now, and all those little pieces of conditioning throughout your whole entire life, every single instance, millisecond, your brain is firing and becoming a magnet. And so the idea is, how do we actually distinguish from a control standpoint of like, is this actually Marco speaking? Is this actually Joe speaking? And the answer for you is it's both. It's yes and no. Because we actually understand who Joe really is and who Marco really is, and to actually really be in control of who we really are, we have to understand that this magnet is conditioned to create all these responses, but there is something trying to download into the magnet, which is the spirit, which is the soul. And this is where you have to kind of let go of maybe some of your belief systems of what spirituality is or what your religions are, and just understand like the simple formula is that there is another antenna or receiver that's trying to push down into the brain, into the magnet, to then receive an output. And this is where we would start to transition into this idea of like mindfulness, Eastern philosophy, and meditation, listening and observing, so that way we understand how to navigate what is the actual conditioned brain, the magnetic brain that's trying to create all these thoughts, and how do I distinguish that, yeah, these are all just thought forms, but which one of those is actually the real Joe that's trying to come down in and trying to relay a thought form and message.
Yeah, and like I do think that when you really pay attention, it is pretty clear to hear that inner voice. Mm-hmm. You know, I find that there is a difference, because everybody here everybody who's listening, everybody who exists has thoughts all day, and
yep.
The reality is not every thought is you don't like every thought, you know, mm-hmm. Like you're not going to like every thought. But I think that's important to eventually distinguish and form a new relationship with it, and learn to try to get comfortable with that, because, you know, if you listen closely, and like I find that if I listen closely, like I could distinguish, you know, like between my inner voice, like that thought form that I feel reflects me, and then stuff that, mm-hmm. you know, seems like outside of myself. And the hardest thing is like wanting to just like push that stuff away, because that also kind of, what I was saying before, kind of gives it almost like it gives it some more juice.
Yeah.
You know?
And the bigger part is to understand, like, not all these things that have been conditioned into the magnet of the nervous system is a bad thing. But how do we distinguish from the control standpoint of which of these thoughts are all based on primitive responses of survival and fear? And then you have to have the free will to then react to those thoughts or responses and know if they're going to be serving you or not. And so, yeah, the bigger picture with all this is just really knowing, and I would kind of, if you guys need a little bit more detail, I would go back to a few of those episodes where I talked a little bit about, you know, the nervous system and the basal ganglia and the chakras and the sacraments and the 7 energy centers, because then we can understand what are these primitive responses or frequencies within our nervous system, and then I can start to distinguish when thought form comes, because it's all going to come through a thought form of what's actually you and what's a conditioned thought. And not saying that all conditioned thoughts are bad, because they kind of make us who we are. Mm-hmm. They create our personas that our spirit starts to navigate with, because that's part of the learning process and growth. But then it's going to start to understand, like, are these personas just egos and maybe just things that are really not who the soul and self are? And so coming back to indigenous cultures, their whole idea was like, you know, understanding that the personas and egos aren't a bad thing, but how do we have a death of those processes? Yeah. How do we start to really move forward from like, all right, this served me, but now I can evolve and move on to my next path of who Marco really is, who Joe really is.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind, and we've talked about this before, you know, you will experience everything. You know, that's the thing. Like, you will experience everything. There's no life exists for you just to be like in this perfect state of like bliss and peace and happiness. Like, you know, you will experience it all, and you know, I've had to reframe that, like accepting that, you know, I will experience discomfort. I will experience, you know, these anxieties and fears, and it's, you know, it's like the more open you are to that, the easier it is to ride the wave.
Yeah, well, then that's how you actually start to manifest and have the things that you're designed to have in your life come to you. And we're going to segue here in a little bit, so we're not going to lose you too much on this topic with generals, but I mean, the really deeper picture of exactly what you just said about experiencing everything is how you actually become more connected to God and Source to be able to experience, because the really deep spiritual meaning that cultures really understand about why there's so much really messed up things in the world, and I know it doesn't make sense for a lot of people, but that's just God being like, I want to experience all that so I know how to come back to balance. I know how to come back to love by only being able to experience the extremes of both polarities. But that's another conversation for another day, all right? We got to talk about the election. We got to talk about politics here, y'all. We're going to get there. But talking about control, talking about thoughts is really important next, because we want to understand, again, coming back to Eastern philosophies, and part of what I've learned a lot in my life and that I practice daily is the art of meditation, the art of listening and observing. And a lot of people are just put off by meditation, mindfulness. I don't think people are ignorant to it in a way that, like, you know, oh, this is dumb, I don't want to do this. I just don't think people understand the value of it because they've never truly experienced, and also it's really hard.
Yes.
Like, how many people are like, oh, it's just hard. My thoughts are all over the place. I can't, it just doesn't work. But that's really the beauty of mindfulness and meditation. And both you and I did a 6-week program with our good friend Jack Curley, who's I've known for a while, and he's a great mentor. But the idea of understanding your thoughts is step one. You have to face every single thought and understand how your mind is working through all these conditioned patterns and behaviors and all this, going from one thought to another thought, another. Like, that's the idea of meditation to begin with, guys. So that's, as somebody who does this daily and really embraces the full practice, that's step one. You have to learn how to navigate what's being thought of emotionally, physically, energetically throughout the whole experience, from just getting you into wanting to be curious about this space.
Yeah, and my advice for people who have curiosity towards meditation, and I encourage everybody to do so, is know that it's not immediately going to be a peaceful experience, that it's going to be hard work. Like, you could think of it similar to, like, probably, like, it'll be more uncomfortable for a lot of people than a hard CrossFit workout. Like, it's not easy, especially when we're so just conditioned to, like, follow our thoughts, like this, like, never-ending chain. Like, just to sit and almost, like, feel yourself really be anchored and observe, it's like, it's really hard. Dude, and it's brutal. Really hard. And just my advice is keep going. Like, keep trusting it and do your best to stay curious and stay open, because this type of work really allows you to really just hear your inner voice very clearly.
Yeah. And meditation is the practice of expanding awareness, and awareness is mindfulness. And there's a lot of ways we can have mindfulness and meditation. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the traditional way, which I'll talk about in a second, but also the traditional way is really what we need to learn. But you can experience mindfulness and meditation through so many things: reading, gardening, physical exercise, movement, even through your work, through cooking, through cleaning. You know, there's so many ways you can experience this expanded awareness and mindfulness and meditation. However, I don't know if I want to say the right way, but meditation, the way it's designed, is to be through stillness.
Yeah.
It's to be through not doing, and this is because this is how you're truly going to be able to get the experience of listening. And like you were saying earlier, like I just observe thought. And at first, people say like, start with 5 minutes and it's great, but like in reality, yes, doing something is better than nothing, 100%. But it's going to take more than 5 minutes for you to get past the process of your thoughts in your brain being all over the place.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. It really takes like 10, and I'll give you guys some tips and everything like that, but it takes a while to get past the monkey mind is what it's called, where your thoughts are all over the place. And then for you to actually be able to transition into where I'm actually listening to what's coming. And then that's the beauty of like, you're actually speaking to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where you get to start to actually have a conversation. Like, who is talking? Who's this coming through? What do you have to say? What are you going to show me? How am I going to, like that's where you can actually have a productive, what we call download. Download meaning an idea, a thought that is actually coming from spirit, and it's not coming from the brain and the nervous system being reactive to all the environment that's around it. So the first tip is you really just have to find a way. And again, right now I'm encouraging you guys to try to find a practice. Set up 10, 15 minutes of your day to just like be in comfort and stillness. So that doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to be full on, cross-legged, upright torso, even though there is a lot of science to why that's recommended. But like you could be lying down, you could be sitting in a chair just like this with getting your spine to be as upright as you can and just trying to relax, close your eyes, and just being in that space. That's step number one. So if you have like tight hips, I have like a naggy knee, so sometimes I have to really make sure I'm in a comfortable position. Like if you're just fidgeting around with the physical body, like you're just gonna keep processing that and you're not gonna be able to bypass that component of thought form. So really get yourself comfortable, and then I'll talk about some other tips, but the idea is like letting go of control. And the way you let go of control is you just start with noticing that whatever is in your thought and just let it be what it is. You're not trying to navigate or go down a rabbit hole, which you very much will. You very much will go down a rabbit hole of a thought, and it happens. And then the best part is you just let go of it. You notice, you're aware that, oh, I'm going through a rabbit hole. Let me come back. I'll talk about the tips here. And then maybe you go through another thought. Maybe you go down another rabbit hole. Oh, I'm going to a rabbit hole. Come back. Maybe it's just a thought. You move on. It's another thought. You move on. And then just keep going through that process of awareness. And then there's going to be a point where there's just stillness.
Yeah.
And now you're just listening. And then you're observing. You're moving less out of the mind, more into the spirit. And then it'll talk a little bit more about the heart.
Yeah, and we're at a disadvantage when it comes to mindfulness practices because like our smartphones are like the enemy of being mindful. Like, you could have a formal practice like that, which I think is great. I think everybody should try to do. But also, as you get familiar with it, try to find just mindfulness practices in everyday life. Like, for example, like for me, like I have a ritual when I get home from coaching, like the late morning, the 9 a.m., like I make breakfast and then I walk my dogs. But like sometimes like as I'm like eating breakfast, like I'm tempted just to pick up my phone.
Yeah.
And I don't know why.
Yeah.
Like just being present with eating something, being present with my walk. Like we're so easily distracted. Like I'm aware of that. And just think about your own life. Like how distracted are you? Like if you're waiting to pick up your kids at the school, like just sit there in the quiet. Like you could find practices and you could find quiet all day long. And, once you're a little bit mindful of that, you can, you really start to just find like these practices and these subtle moments are really cool.
Exactly. How do you find peace? How do you find quiet? And yeah, let me give you guys some tips. So a few things with with meditation to start, I would say it's very helpful for people who are new to have like some sort of music. You know, you could look up easily like meditation music on a Spotify, plug in your earphones and just be in there. That's one, because that'll help distract the monkey mind towards something that allows you to be in a more observative state. You're observing the music, and then, thoughts go away. However, the number one component that comes down to like when you notice you have thoughts is your breathing. So yes, I talk a lot about breath work, and I really push it on this community for a lot of different ways. Obviously, one is performance-based for your workouts and breathing and just overall life and longevity. And, the one thing you do have control over is your breath. And when you learn how to control your breath, meaning you're actually navigating how it works, then you start to actually become less reactive of a person. That's really the whole idea, is like you control your breath to become less in control, to become more in control. Yeah. And so when you just notice that you're meditating, mindfulness, whatever, you're being still, and the monkey mind comes, I go off on a tangent, you just breathe. I would recommend holding your breath and do slow exhales. And there's a whole neuroscience to how your nervous system shifts from sympathetic, which is monkey mind, to parasympathetic, which is observative and listening. And then there's all different types of meditation where obviously like you're prompted, you're being talked through to put your thoughts in your mind into these states. So like for example, how music does is guiding you. Mm-hmm. But again, prompting and talking, different types of awareness. There's choiceless awareness, there's chanting, there's a whole different other forms of meditation. There's really no right or wrong. Yeah. Just want to put it like that. But in the end, going back to like Eastern philosophy before we shift gears, is really like having a practice of listening and observing, also known as meditation. It's not praying. Praying is a form of meditation, but praying is you more telling yourself, I am. That's a prayer. I am. These are called mantras in Eastern philosophy versus, help me. Instead of asking when you pray, it's confirm, affirm, positive affirmations, telling yourself. Like that's true prayer in Eastern philosophies and Catholicism. Like it's actually stating, because now your thought form is changing your energy and frequency. And so that's the real science of Eastern philosophies to meditation and mindfulness, is to change your energetic state or frequency and vibration to connect more to the spirit, the soul, and the heart. And not to get too much on a tangent, but the primitive mind that we talked about is what's called a second dimension of being. So let's just say, for example, what are two-dimensional beings that we see and we have every single day in our lives that we interact with that are only based off of primitive awareness? Think about you see them every day when you walk in the house.
In my house?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah.
My dogs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love them.
They're two-dimensional beings. Our animals, our pets are two-dimensional beings. They only perceive life through primitive responses. That doesn't mean that they cannot increase their energy and frequency to become a third-dimensional, or at least more towards third-dimensional, which what we are. We have all the primitive responses, but we are aware of time and space. Mm-hmm. We perceive time and space. Jelly Bean doesn't necessarily perceive time and a clock or space. No. It knows, for example, like my cats, they have the primitive response of knowing that they get fed around this time, but they don't perceive time. They're not aware of the time in itself. They're not aware of space in itself and how it's working. They just, I want to be a pet. Feed me, right? So these are two-dimensional beings. Doesn't mean they don't have a soul, which they do, but the soul's going through a two-dimensional experience to potentially evolve to a third dimensional experience where they actually, and you see like animals that like, they're so aware, right? They actually connect to their owners or the humans. Like these are animals that are now expanding their consciousness in ways that are being allowed to be conditioned to them, which is a whole nother topic. But for us to become more in control and through meditation, and what we're actually trying to achieve through this practice is to shift our dimension into the fourth dimension. So we're now becoming more aware of what is in reality, and time doesn't really become as much of a construct to us. That's where we talk about like the essence of time. And so when we evolve to a fourth dimensional being, we are then beings that are aware of who's actually speaking, which is spirit. So for you, you're probably, I know this just from seeing a lot of things through journeys, but like you've raised your frequency and energy to be from a third dimensional being to a fourth dimensional being just because you are more aware of that inner voice and when Joe is actually going through, when son Joe is actually moving and going through his day-to-day life. Doesn't mean that you're not experiencing third dimension for what it is. And so the end of the tangent here is, well, what's the end goal with dimensions? And it's really to get our spirit goal is to connect more to source, which is the creator of everything in all life and everything in all the universe. But that's another idea. So our goal as human beings is to eventually shift our frequency and energy to a dimensional state, which is just simply saying being more aware of who we are, what our purpose is and why we're here, and how we go through our day-to-day lives with, again, more freedom, more control. So, which is politics and election day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I read through like Marco writes up the show notes, and I always read through it. And I was looking at this one, I'm like, how are we gonna talk about like I love this topic, and then I'm like, I see election 101. I'm like, how does this tie? And I was like, that's like saying it's like saying this is how you cook spaghetti, and then swimming lessons are after. Like, what is? I don't know. I'm looking forward because I'm on this journey too. I'm not sure how this is going to tie to the election.
Oh, well,
Let's find out.
That's what happens. I meditate a lot, so I listen to Marco. But sometimes a lot of my thoughts are maybe just conditioned thoughts too. So I'm learning to navigate that space myself. But I want to talk about this idea of freedom because we're in America, right? This whole idea of like being free.
Yeah.
This is actually to hype up for those who know Micah Sneed, who's having the event at Ardmore Free Library this upcoming Saturday, November 9th at 7 to 10 p.m. All people are welcome to buy a ticket, but they're speakers, and I get to speak with actually Meg Sneed, who's his wife, a member here, with a few others to talk about like this idea of what does being free mean to us. Like we have this whole freedom, America, right? But what does it actually mean? And I think from what I understand, and we're going into the election, we're voting for a president, and we're depending on an outside source, a person, something, a program, a law, a policy to control how we are going to go through our lives. And so our perspective is we're thinking about the outer world for our freedom. I'm not saying this is everybody, I'm just saying I'm just generalizing here. And freedom is actually the opposite. It's all about the inner world, us. And this goes into our whole philosophy through our whole podcast of Medicine 3.0. Medicine 3.0 is all about you being the inner wisdom, the inner healer, the one to control the preventative medicine, the preventative tool to your health and wellness. And so we're just automatically changing and less about relying on somebody to do everything for me and more about me doing everything for me.
And I think that's a really good mindset to have. I just think it is also important to also understand that you are allowed, and it is a good thing to feel the natural emotions that arise that come from like real life things. Like this isn't meant to say that like, oh, a new politician, a new president's in place and they change this and like that affects your personal life this way and that's hard, and that affects your business this way and like that makes it harder. Like it's fine, it's normal, like it's I don't want to like say like you should feel, there are times when you should feel like experience everything, right? You know, feel there are things that'll happen that you'll feel great about. There are things that happen that like will be hurtful to you or scary to you. But I do think putting it all in perspective of finding that inner peace is really where, you know, you come back to, because at the end of the day, no matter what, you're living in this world, and you're living in this world, and you know, it's kind of like Michael Singer-ish, right? Like why, like you could choose how you want to approach each experience, because that experience is happening. Like no matter what, like this happens to you, like you're going to be alive and in this moment, regardless of how you choose to react to it. So it's not saying you shouldn't be upset about things. It's not saying that, you know, you shouldn't be happy about things. It's just understanding that at the end of the day, then, like, what is your choice going to be in living with yourself in the world that surrounds you, like in your own inner world?
100%. And that's a really hard conversation, because like you said, like, no matter what side wins, I don't even know if I want to say it like that, but no matter what side wins or what the end goal, whatever happens, you still have to make your own personal changes. You still have to go inward to really make the change that you want to see in the world. And our inherent, I talked about, you know, the frequency of love and source and spirit, like this is what every ancient scripture and religious scripture says, no matter if you're religious or not, like they all got their information from somewhere, and that information is all about the human coming back to knowing who it is, what it is, and how does it come back to love consciousness. Not saying that we have to, you know, be able to hug each other all the time or whatever, but it's like, how do we accept each other and coexist and be able to look at each other's point of view without judgment? And that's really hard with politics. And that's why, you know, this is something that I keep out of the gym, because the gym is the one place where you all have common ground. You all are doing something for yourself that is exactly the same workout in your own unique way. And it's just coming back to center, right? How do we come back to center as these bigger changes are going to start to happen, which majority of us may not even really experience? And how do we let go of expecting a president to change the world for us if we're not even willing to change ourselves? And that's really the bigger question I want to come back to is, you know, start with yourself, because there's these laws of the universe that most of us have not been open to yet or evolved to yet, or really, you know, like we said, the whole death process, like a lot of us have to have a death to our egos. We all need that. And that's why I'm a big believer in the psychedelic renaissance and what these medicines really will do for our communities and for ourselves, is they will teach you, when used in the right way, they will teach you how to look at the world from a much more clearer point of view. And that may or may not involve a death of your ego, meaning just like a persona of how you think about things in your life. And not saying that it's a bad thing, but it might allow you to reframe your perspective to creating this service to self. But more importantly, how do I create a narrative of service to others? And in the end game, this is part of our evolution. We have to start with our inner world, so that way we can make change to the outer world in a way that's serving others in a positive way, that's bringing people together versus tearing people apart. And really, that's kind of bigger picture what we want to get to with politics. And what I think we're starting to see a lot more of is younger generations in particular are probably like getting over this whole one side versus other side. There's probably fluctuations from both to both, but it's just eventually, my personal opinion is that it's not going to last. At some point, it's all going to blow up. No matter what side wins, it's going to blow up. And from my understanding is that there's going to be in a few years something that's really going to shift our collective way of thinking in our society, that's really going to allow us to come back to who we are and why we're here. And it might not even have anything to do with the presidency of who wins. And that might allow us to create a whole new way of being within our society as people and as human beings that, want to just do better. And if you're somebody that doesn't think like that, then that's okay. But if you really go back to this meditation practice of like who's actually speaking, who is actually thinking, who is actually wanting to do the thought, action, emotion, that spirit, it's probably something that wants to be positive. And it might put you through something really hard and negative to hopefully give you that free will and choice to come back to the positive. So in the end, go vote for yourself. All right? Saying it right now. Go vote for yourself. Get the ballot, bang, write your name, cash it in, and guess what? I think we'll all end up with the right person. What do you think?
Yeah, and like at the end of the day, man, like you got to find peace. You got to find, and you're only going to find that in yourself. And I just can't stress enough that it doesn't mean like you shouldn't care about things in the outside world. You shouldn't care about issues that matter to you. You shouldn't care about values. But at the end of the day, like you got to find your own, like this is our world and we're living in it, man. Like this is it. You got to find a way to find your, like find yourself, find peace.
I know. It sounds so like hoity-toity too. It's like, oh, let's go find. No, but you're right, right?
It's true, like.
But I think whoever you guys vote for, I still love all you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what side. I'm not here to shove a side in anybody's face. And I'm also willing, which I believe this is the first start of evolution, is like people are just going to be more open-minded to listening to both sides. I think we're still very far from it, but there's an evolution of people like just being willing to find the neutral ground of like, okay, this policy makes sense on this side, this policy actually makes sense on this side. Maybe where the voices are coming from on the other side, maybe aren't making it, selling it, but we have to be able to be at least accepting and not judgmental of listening.
Yeah, and avoid the H word, hate. Gotta avoid
100%. I mean, the word is a frequency and a vibration in itself. So hopefully we got a lot out of this, everybody. All right? Yes. Go make your votes tomorrow. Obviously, when you hear this podcast, we're going to know who's in office, and it really starts with yourself. You being in control of yourself. So start to listen. Who's speaking? If you can't figure that out, you got to start meditating, y'all. Got to be still. That's why we do our 3 breaths. And if you don't know where to start, you know where to find us. We're here to help you. And we're also here at MFP to just really set that example of, being a space where people can come together no matter what side you're on. All right? You ain't here to brag about what side you're on, but we're here to bring you to center and be like, yo, come back to center. Slap. Fitness. Bring people together. CrossFit. Save the world. Boom.
Boom. Done.
All
you got to do.
All right, guys. Love you all. All right. Talk to you soon and see you at the gym. See you all next week. We got a guest. All right.